en avbild av människokroppen, känselorgan. På liknande sätt är vi tvungna att producera en avbild av människokroppen. Denna avbild är utrustad med elektroniska känselorgan. Detta är ett försök att upptäcka de många olika typer av stötar.
You're upset.
Då och då används verkliga människokroppar i detta konst.
I'm all right now.
Hey, and welcome to another edition of MovieStrange. Everybody knows how this works. I am cult film curious, basically. And I have my two guys here, Al and Drew, and they are cult film experts. And we all know how it works. They give me 4 words each for their movies. I pick a movie, and then we watch that film. But I changed it up a little this time, and I did what's called Ralph's Request, a little R&R. And this is a case where I pick a movie, cult film that I knew about, was wary about, wasn't sure I ever want to watch it. And because we're doing this, I decided to pick one of those. And this one, for this week, I picked the movie Crash. That's David Cronenberg's Crash, not that horrible 2004 Oscar-winning Crash. So this is what I watched. And yeah, go ahead.
First of all, thank you for the public service announcement of telling people to avoid the other Crash, because that is really
not too good.
Garbage.
Right.
So what made you wary of seeing Crash? I could guess and have a long list, but what specifically made you wary?
Well, why don't you give me 2 things on the list you thought I might have been wary of?
Okay. Graphic gore from car accidents and unsettlingly graphic sex in close proximity to the upsetting gore from the car accidents.
Yes, it would have been both of those things. You know, I had heard about the film. I knew about the film. I'm a David Cronenberg fan. Fan. I like his films. The Fly, some of his more, some grotesque ones in there. Some of his later ones aren't so grotesque, but they're pretty violent, like The History of Violence. And
I heard you're a fan of Existenz, for example.
I did watch Existenz, and I quite enjoyed that one at the end, as we know in the podcast where I talked about. I was wary about it. Then the end happened, and I ended up loving it. Eastern Promises, I think, is another one of his. That's one of his later ones that I really enjoyed. I've seen Dead Ringers, but I knew about this one. Didn't ever want to watch it because I was worried about, not worried, obviously I'm not worried, but I just didn't feel like dealing with it. And frankly, I thought it was going to be super kinky because James Spader's in this thing. You got Rosanna Arquette is in this. You got Elias Koteas. I don't know how to say his name.
Let's go with Koteas.
And then they throw Holly Hunter in there. And I read that Holly was begging to do a Cronenberg film, and this is the one she ended up on. So I finally watched it. And I didn't like it. And it had nothing to do... What?
I'm shocked.
Well, okay. Someone needs to explain to me, one of you guys, pick one of you. Al, how about you, Al? Because you have the 4K. I think, Drew, you've read the book, the author's book.
I actually read the book in college when I saw the movie. And then I reread it last night because I couldn't sleep.
Okay. What's the name of the author?
It's J.G. Ballard.
Okay. You sent that YouTube clip, that BBC4.
Yeah, we'll talk about that
because that's disturbing as well. But so Al, give our audience, because and by the way, as we all know, spoilers. We're going to spoil the film. Yeah. So just be aware. If you don't want to hear anything, come back later after you watch it, and you can watch this fantastic show we're about to do.
And
so
listen,
Al,
I know we've gotten some letters about doing too many spoilers. This movie is 25 years old.
Right.
So I think that's at the limit of where it's probably okay to do spoilers. So
but it has had a 4K. This is a poster for the 4K edition, I think, that's come out. And I don't know. Before we start, should I show a preview, or Al, do you want to give me a little synopsis, and then we'll show the preview?
Let's just show the preview, I think.
Get right to it. I love it.
The car crash is a liberation of sexual energy rather than a destructive event. It's something we are all intimately involved in. The reshaping of the human body by modern technology.
to me.
You coming?
Aren't we all?
Yeah, that's subtle.
We're doing.
They have no idea who we really are.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay. Give me a little synopsis, and I have a couple things I want to say before we get off into it.
I just based on that trailer, like this film is not that. I see it as way more slow, and methodical than what they were presenting there.
Yeah. Well,
It's
the film
not
is
action-packed.
no,
It's not an action-packed like.
no. It's
super-
very slow shots
Yeah.
of people's hands on crotches everywhere in the film.
and wounds and.
Well, okay, we'll get into that. We'll get into that whole how.
If I'm being really reductive, I think what this film is really about is a couple that has probably been together for a long time and has started experimenting in different ways. And then James Spader is involved in a car accident, which I would probably describe as a limit experience, which totally turns his idea of sexuality on its head. And he gets sucked into this world of car crash fetishists, and it becomes like a love triangle between him, his wife, and Elias Koteas, who's playing Vaughn.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And it is slow. I was expecting a little bit more. It's strangely seems dated. The slowness seems it just seems off. And part of it is that's James Spader. Well, the beginning is he's having sex with somebody in a camera closet. The whole film starts with her licking the fuselage of an airplane while some guy's licking.
Her being James Spader's wife, Deborah Kara Unger.
I'm sorry, Deborah Kara Unger, playing James Spader's wife, is licking the fuselage of an airplane while some strange, handsome dude is licking her butt. Right?
Yep.
And we have this big joke on my other podcast I do about Carmen Diaz banging a Lamborghini, as if that's some. This movie takes that and just it's times 10. Okay,
This movie is better than The Counselor, Ralph.
I'm not saying. Okay, I beg to differ, but that's fine. That's fine. We all know my feelings on The Counselor, which I love. So they're in a very strange relationship, and he gets in that car crash, and we just say it. They hit head on. The driver of that car ends up coming through his windshield and dying in his car. And Holly Hunter is a passenger in the other car who, when she pulls her seatbelt off, you see her boob. And then they end up in the same hospital hallway. And they both have the car crash. And they get introduced to Vaughn. Is that his name? Vaughn?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Elias Koteas' character.
Who at the moment we don't know what his thing is, but you can tell something weird is going on.
But he's very pasty and his greasy fingernails, and what you see of just his face has a bunch of scars on it, and later you'll learn his whole body is covered in scars.
He definitely looks damaged for sure, both physically and mentally, because he's the way he sniffs over James Spader and that whole scene where he's in there. So I mean, the film films take me out of their realm when it just all looks like they're the only people existing in the city, right? So they're driving around these cities, and it's always empty, and they're always doing crazy things in the cars. And you guys can get into more about the subculture of people who love car crashes and how they're all sexualized by that.
I like how you think I'm an expert on this.
Well, the whole theory about, when you start reading this guy, like the video you sent me.
So we must be experts.
But when you mention about the author, and he's talking about how car crashes are like that's how it's simulating sex and how the bodies are being reshaped by the car. But again, you're in this situation where everybody seems a little outside reality, right? but you have to but you're in a subculture, so they're outside reality. But it all seems too like they're all in that one couch scene where they're watching those slow motion car crashes, the Swiss made with the bodies, and they're all putting their hands on their crotches. And normally, I like that. I'm like, oh, we got crotch stuff, and it's just like enough already with this. It's too much. And someone needs to explain to me what I did like, the one thing I liked, the scene I loved, was when Vaughn talks about the James Dean car crash. And that whole thing
narrates the presentation.
Well, they actually do the car crash, right?
Wait, but you're the whole thing about how he sets it up and pitches it to the audience, and
yeah, I found that fascinating. Like you
didn't think it was too glib.
Well, maybe. They're also, it's not real. Those guys.
That's what he asks James Spader about, if his line about James Dean broke his neck and became immortal, was that too glib?
You guys are I missed that. Sorry.
There's a lot to distract you.
Yeah, but there's gore because people are sticking fingers in wounds. James Spader actually.
In terms of gore, this is light gore. I wouldn't say this is.
Well, no, it's not. It's not.
And it's not full body horror either.
No.
This is like light. To me, it's light body horror. Like when you're comparing it to other Cronenberg body horror, this is kind of subdued body horror.
A little bit. Yeah, and I was going to say that it's a lot less. It's a lot less explicit than I thought it was going to be. Actually, it's pretty tame when you think about it. There's some scenes. There's he does that whole scene where his wife is in the back seat in the car wash,
right?
And her hand comes up over the seat, and it's got semen all over her hand from Vaughn, and she's reaching up to her husband, who's watching this whole thing. It's that kind of stuff that Cronenberg does. It's that icky, body fluid stuff happening, and the whole car wash is pounding on the windows. Sort of interesting. But then when I watched that 1974 clip you sent me of the author doing an interview, that video that he shot of him talking about cars, he does that whole car wash scene in that as well, where he has this dream girl that keeps in that car.
Well, anyway. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that for a second, because the book came out in 1973, and that clip from the BBC4 is basically an art project film that he starred in. He didn't create it alone, but he started in it, and that was a part of it was inspired by a short story in a previous collection, and it was part of an art exhibit, and that whole thing turned into Crash, the novel. And so a lot of what you see in the in that short film, it's about 17 minutes, is really very faithful to the novel in terms of the imagery. And it's Ballard himself stars in that movie, right, and is saying his own prose, a lot of which ends up in the book, some of it verbatim. And also there's the scene that's the most like the book, just in terms of what the book is about and what its images are about, is the scene. It's not very subtle or anything, but where the woman is naked in the shower, and it cuts between her body parts and parts of American cars. So the curve of her shoulder and the curve of the car, that kind of stuff.
Very explicit about that.
Yeah, that's very explicitly
it's
described.
Literal.
In the book as well.
Oh wow.
So,
well, he also did that scene about the woman getting out of a car. He explains as you watch a woman get out of a car, and she leans her butt out, and she comes up, and her breast gets on the top of the top of the car, and it presses the breast. He's doing that whole thing and that, and
also about how a woman takes herself out of a car after having had an accident.
Right.
So you compare the normal human interaction with the car and technology with she's had this accident, she's bleeding. How she maneuvers out of the car that has collapsed around her or crushed around her. See, that's the other thing that's kind of interesting about this movie, is that it's a different kind of car crash, because cars are so different. So cars in the 50s and the 70s, they used to take the hit and impale you. And cars now, they crumble so that you don't get hurt. Of course, you can still get hurt, you can still die.
Yeah.
But the cars that they use in the movie, especially the older cars from the car crashes, they really are like those giant, Widowmaker.
Well, he did that. You talk about
boxes.
that James Dean scene where they simulate the crash. They're not wearing any seatbelts or
Nope.
they're
Well,
doing
I
those.
think it kind of speaks to the relevancy of this film. Like, is this still relevant in this day and age with because the cars aren't similar, we don't have similar car crashes. Like, maybe the weird fetishistic sex stuff might be relevant, but
I mean, they went like
because it's very old world, it's very analog and machine like, whereas in now everything is like digitally driven. So
well, I think they even say that in the film. Was it in the film or the other one where they talk about how modern cars don't have the character that the older ones did? Right, everything's been homogenized, and the fins are gone, and the grill that looks like the front of somebody's chest is gone, and all those things that made, specifically the author was talking about American-made cars, the big Lincolns, and I think Vaughn drove around in the Lincoln that Kennedy was assassinated in, or the model that Kennedy was assassinated.
Model,
yeah.
Because he could consider that a car accident after a fashion. I mean, it depends how broadly you want to read the book, and this is true of Ballard's writing, of a lot of modern contemporary fiction writing. It's about a bunch of people who have a really low amount of emotion in their lives, and that's also portrayed in the movie. I think Mark Kermode, the film critic, said that the performances in the movie were glacial.
Yeah, he's right, and
he liked that because these are people who are searching for sensation. One of the things that we didn't mention when we were just talking about the premise of the movie is that James Spader and Deborah Kara Unger's characters are married and have clearly been married for some time and are clearly not as enamored of that situation as they were, but they still love each other, but they've opened up their relationship.
Yeah.
So when you first meet her character, she's having sex with somebody in an airplane hangar. And then the second scene is James Spader having sex with someone who works for him. He's a TV and commercial producer. There's nothing in the movie or their relationship about those things being bad or hidden or anything like that. So
yeah, because in the next scene they come back and have sex with each other on the balcony.
Right. And in the book, it's very clear that part of their relationship is, and part of what makes them aroused for each other is sharing those experiences with each other.
Clearly,
I mean, like literally in the book, they're describing, what happened today in the hangar, that kind of stuff. And so it's when you said, Al, when you said that it becomes like a love triangle, I think that's a fair read, but really it's all these people together switching off in different pairs, and it doesn't really fit any sort of traditional romantic pattern that I can see. It's more about Vaughn is the center, drawing them in because he is full of raw emotion.
But like towards the second half of the film, everybody fades away except for Deborah Kara Unger and James Spader and Vaughn. Like Holly Hunter disappears from the film until the end when her and Rosanna Arquette pair off in Vaughn's death car.
Right.
So like that's why I'm
true.
saying it's more of it becomes a triangle between them with power and sex and.
Well, Holly Hunter's character, Dr. Remington, she kind of drops out of the movie, like you said, and that's exactly like the book. She seems very important, and then she kind of disappears. And that's part of what I wanted to talk about today. I don't love this movie or anything, and yet I find that I still think there's a lot to talk about with the movie. My first reaction to the movie, which I remember quite vividly because I saw this movie on a date, and it was a critics and early screening thing. So not only was it a date, it was like, I could take this girl to see a movie before it comes out, and that's cool. And we watched it, and it wasn't to us, as I think, more normally psychologically balanced people than some of the people portrayed in this movie. It was not erotic at all. Yeah, there's a lot of sex in it. It's not erotic, and in that way, it reminded me of another hit film, Showgirls. But the point of the sex in the movie isn't to titillate you. It's like the movie. It's not the movie doesn't. You're not going to look at this movie and say this didn't work because it wasn't hot. even though it has all these things that are very erotic, it's very explicit, it's very graphic, all this kind of stuff, because it's not really about sex for sex. It's really about technology and humanity and how people are lost in this vast landscape of cars. I mean, the book is set in London and real locations, and the movie is shot in Toronto and basically apparently in David Cronenberg's neighborhood, at least at the time.
Within 30 minutes of his house or something.
Something like that, yeah. And so to me, because I love book adaptations. And as book adaptations go, this is a really interesting combination of being exceptionally faithful to so much of the book, and then in some very specific, important ways, not really faithful at all. And some of the stuff that's really funny, because remember, I watched this movie today after having not seen it for 20 years, 25 years. And I read the book last night after having not read it for that long for that amount of time. I mean, there is so much more dialogue than I remembered that's straight out of the book. I mean, a lot of the conversations on the balcony and in the hospital and with Holly Hunter in the different sexual encounters in the car and all these things. Like Vaughn is the most different while still being a lot like the book, but a lot of the situations and the dialogue is straight out of the book, which normally isn't a good idea. I mean, the first Harry Potter movie is basically like a transcription of the first movie, of the first book, and it kind of feels lifeless. So I like that it wasn't like that the whole time, but that really struck me how it was just much more faithful than I'd remembered.
It's funny you say lifeless. You said the word lifeless, because that's how like these characters are lifeless, and I get it. I get that they get
clinical is what it is.
That's right. It's clinical and lifeless, and they get all their whatever it is from car crashes and the eroticism from the car crash, and they're feeding off each other, right? They're all omni lovers or whatever you call it. Everybody's connected to everybody.
Right, and the story is about what they feel. This movie is not, as far as I can tell, is not trying to say you should feel this with them.
I think that's what I mean.
You can be repelled by it, you can be confused by it, but it's not like there's the opposite of this movie. Let's say is Out of Sight.
They're not selling you a lifestyle with this movie.
Right, but like George Clooney's and Jennifer Lopez in Out of Sight, which is for a lot of reasons a great movie, great mystery, great screenplay, all these other things. They're just really sexy. You watch it and it's a hot piece of storytelling. And this is the opposite, even though it's way more explicit and has way more scenes of sex and sexual interaction and all this kind of stuff. But I think it's okay that the book and the movie aren't asking me to want to be them. I'm fine with that. I don't want to be them.
Right.
I don't need to be them.
But I want it to be a good movie.
Right. That's different.
Different.
But if you spend 25 years thinking this movie is full of crazy gore and nudity and hardcore sex, no, it's not. That's the thing with people who've never seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre have imagined a much gorier version of that movie, which is a really scary and really intense movie.
Which I've never seen.
Oh, but it's not gory.
It's not gory.
That's what everyone says, and I believe it. But
it's crazy and intense and worth your time.
And this one was like, I'm like, okay. There was a couple of sexy scenes, right? I mean, Unger is pretty cute. Holly Hunter, it's nice to see her doing a little sexy stuff. Spader always comes off as a little bit, lethargic. I don't know. I can't quite get my vibe on him.
Well, that's what I was going to say. My first reaction when I first saw the movie was all these people in this movie are weird, strange, different, whatever. And in that kind of story, sometimes if I don't really relate to them, which is fine if I do or I don't, that's everybody brings their own thing to the movie. I need someone who's a little more, not necessarily like me, but a little more, a little closer to the center of a normal human.
That's a good point.
James Spader is the closest to that character, and he's nowhere near where that needs to be. So I felt almost the way that the movie told the story, I was almost left out, and I wanted somebody to be there. And my favorite scene in the whole movie that solved that problem for me is, of course, in the dealership. Is there something? When that poor salesman encounters James Spader and Rosanna Arquette, they just want to try out a Mercedes, and she's leaning over the car, and you can see her grievous scars, and she's
wearing the whole apparatus.
Explain what she's reaction. Oh shit! This is really bad. This is really bad. This is
Explain
crazy.
what she's wearing. Explain everybody what she's wearing. I mean, she's full body cast practically, right?
Well, she's had a terrible accident. We don't see the accident, but she's had a terrible accident, and she has a brace on both legs.
A brace that comes up. She's got
the body.
A big circle on one boob.
Yeah, so we see some pictures of her accident because Vaughn takes pictures of accidents.
Right.
And you see her looking dazed and bloody, but whatever happened to her was very serious, awful injuries and left her disabled. But she's one of the sexier characters in the movie, really, which is kind of neat because she's she's a beautiful woman, but she's so confident, and the way that she unsettles that salesman and enjoys unsettling that salesman, and you can relate to his confusion, and a normally confident type of person like a car salesman. That scene for me, that jumped out at me at the movie as far as I'm kind of getting. I'm connecting with this movie. Well, and then of course went back to being the movie that it was.
Well, he is the only outside normal character in the whole film, right? You're right. He's the only one that relates to these people that has nothing to do with these people. Everybody that's sitting at the James Dean car crash thing, they're all part of this. Every time they cut to the house that they all live in, they're all together. Anytime they go in the hospital, you're only seeing them in the hospital. So that guy's the only guy. And she was Roseanne Arquette was very cute, very sexy in this. And that scene at the end with her and Holly Hunter, I mean, that was pretty good. I mean, it's not explicit at all, but it's very sexual and it's very, it's satisfying. It's nice. But of course, it's in, like you said, it's in Vaughn's death car. And this is two scenes after James Spader and Vaughn were having some kind of sex in a crumpled up car too.
Right.
Well, they were having homosexual sex in Vaughn's Lincoln Continental or Lincoln car.
Which then I think Vaughn decided that he should, ram into James Spader's character in
post-coital.
We didn't. I don't know if we actually said that. James Spader's character is the author of the novel. Yeah. His name is James Ballard. So he is, and that's how the novel is. The novel is, that's the other part I was talking about being left out. The novel is a first-person novel, a first-person story told by Ballard, the author. But he tells you different parts of different things, and you don't know exactly what's going on, and he's not exactly reliable. And he's definitely already in a different place than I am as far as like how I felt about his character by James Spader in the movie. But part of that storytelling is the movie is of course not first person. It can't really be first person. Movies are third person. So a lot of the stuff of figuring out what does James Ballard really feel when he's having this experience. Of course, in the book, it's in his head. And in the movie, it's across James Spader's already odd face and reactions, some of which really works, but you can't help but be outside of the experience of it. And again, that's not a comment of, well, then the book is better. It's just, it is very different storytelling of a very distinct story.
I didn't make it all the way through the book. I think I made it through like the first 5 chapters, and I find the movie to be way more palatable than the book. Like, for me, the book is like, the things he writes and the way he writes them, it's like it's repellent to me. Like it's work to read his writing. Like you have to want to push through it because just like I'm fairly open-minded, but like the things that he was saying, it's just like he's trying to be transgressive rather than telling a story, I guess. And I just find it, and it's like how hard can I push the reader to make him put down the book or her, or they're gonna push through it and read the whole thing. And like I don't think it's like I could not sit down and read the whole thing in one take. Like it's gonna take me a while to actually read the entire.
Having just read it in one take, laying in bed from about midnight to 3 a.m. listening to Howard Shore's score as I was reading it. Howard Shore's score to this movie. Howard Shore's done an awful lot of David Cronenberg scores and then a lot of other stuff like the Lord of the Rings movies. And it's a spectacular score that really fits the movie.
You're really doing a lot of research for this show. Holy cow.
Well, the book is, I love movies. The book is, like your reaction, Al's reaction, your reaction to the book totally makes sense. There was nothing about what you're saying in the book that made me want to keep reading it. Yeah. Because the book is, I'm looking at my notes here. It's much dirtier, but not because of its explicit sexual content, although it is far more explicit. It's dirtier. It's more gooey. It's more moist. It's stickier.
It's funny you say that about it.
Well, that scene that you mentioned where she reaches forward, and I'm not sure if that's supposed to be semen or if that's supposed to be something from her, but it's like a goo from the sex that she's having with another man while her husband's driving them through the car wash.
I think
And
it's
the whole
called a
book is full of
Santorum.
that. What?
I think it's called a Santorum.
Right. I think the Santorum is a legitimate thing that you can encounter in sexual experiences. I don't know that that's what it was in the movie, but in the book, there's an awful lot of that sort of thing, of mixtures of different things from different orifices. And that's before you get into the new orifices, which is what you see in the movie where James Spader actually puts his penis in Rosanna Arquette's
Wound.
scar. There's a lot of that at the end of the book. Because, see, that's the thing.
And let's be clear, they don't show. I mean, they imply it. You don't see it. You see what he's going for.
Frontal, considering that
It's Cronenberg getting away with showing sex without showing sex. I mean,
there's no frontal male nudity in the movie.
No.
And a lot of NC-17 movies, they frankly they get that because there's a penis.
Yeah.
And so this movie has a lot of explicit sex. It doesn't have that.
Of course. I mean, it's all boobs and wounds or wound. I mean,
it's definitely because I think Cronenberg does use some of the language, like the dirtier language that's in the book. It's just like I think for me in the book, it's unrelenting. It's like
it's grueling.
He uses pubis like 10 times in 5 pages, and I'm like, dude, you just ruined the word for me.
He said it 5 times in the video you guys sent.
He breaks people down to parts.
Yeah,
and usually
like a
the
car.
parts are broken down to, if they're not the injured parts, because everything injured fascinates these characters, then it's their sexual parts.
Yeah,
and that's a lot of that. I mean, the descriptions of that scene with James Spader and Rosanna Arquette in the book, as far as what happens and where things flow in different channels in her scar stuff, is very graphic, and the movie doesn't go anywhere near that sort of thing. Well, but here's the thing: okay. the book, the movie has less narrative than the book. In some ways, it has more structure because I don't know if you know this about the book, but in the book, Vaughn's character has a goal.
Yes,
and it's clear in the movie that his goal is to die in a car crash, and that will be the height of not just sexual but any ecstasy for him. But in the book, his goal is to die in a car crash when he crashes into the actress Elizabeth Taylor.
Right.
So he wants to kill Elizabeth Taylor and die in that accident.
While they're both orgasming at the same time.
Right. I'm not sure how he wants to have her be orgasming because they're in 2 separate cars and he's never met her. But that's his dream. And in the movie, that's not part of the story. And I know that David Cronenberg consciously said, I'm not going to make it about Elizabeth Taylor. 20-some years later, I'm not going to make it about another real actress. That kind of changes Vaughn's character because he is a rocket on this path to this goal. And so at the end of the movie, spoilers, when he's trying to run James Spader and Deborah Kara Unger off the road, and then I don't even know, does he lose control? Does he just finally give up? He goes flying off the overpass and into a bus and dies and kills people in the bus. That accident, falling in the bus, killing people, is what happens in the book. Except he missed Elizabeth Taylor. Like he hit her car, but he didn't kill her.
Oh.
And it's like the first 5 or 10 pages that this is being described.
Yes, if you first meet these characters, Vaughn's body is on the side of the accident, and Ballard is talking about, well, in the past year that I've gotten to know Vaughn, this is what happened to me and our lives together. So the movie begins and ends with that. So the whole, what do these people want to get out of it, and they're all drawn by Vaughn, is different in the book, and it's less compelling in the movie. But on the other hand, a lot of the stuff that promotes the book and the movie, and they talk about it's a cult of car accidents. It's not a cult. It's a bunch of people who are drawn together by their grief and their pain and their desire to feel something different or at all. But it's not a cult. It doesn't feel like they might be having a religious type of experience, but it's not.
Yeah, but I mean, okay.
They're not going to turn into martyrs or something.
2 things I wanted before we move on to the next segment. Okay, the reason I brought up James Spader is, correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed like the person who this happened to had to have been a little more naive and a little less, James Spader latched on real quick to this subculture. Because he's James Spader, you already assume that he's got some twisted thing going on in his head. And that took me out a little bit. It's like, because it seemed too convenient that the crash was happening, too convenient that he bumps into Holly Hunter in the hallway, too convenient that he ends up with the same fetish that she has, or she pushed him to that fetish, but he went like that. There was no question that he was going to. So there was no But again, you start the movie with him banging somebody in a closet, his wife banging somebody by a plane, and they come home and they talk about it and they bang each other. And she talks about what she wants him to do with Vaughn. Whatever you do with Vaughn, I want you to tell me. Tell me every. So I got confused about motivations actually.
When I first saw that movie, I think that was my first what the F moment, was when they were having sex and she was asking James Spader to describe Vaughn's body and what he would do, and I wasn't prepared for where it was going.
Verbatim.
Right out of the book.
And when you do it, tell me. Describe it to me when you do it. And he ends up doing it. Now, let's flash forward to the end. So it ends with James Spader chasing Deborah Unger in her car, right?
Right.
And you talked about the other film about the woman getting her body out of a car crash. They kind of simulated the positioning in that last scene where Deborah Unger's car goes over the ramp and crashes. Yep. They posed her the way that woman was posed in that other thing, her legs under the car, bleeding and all that. Was she trying to kill herself? Was that the whole point of the film, that she's trying to kill herself and he's going to help, or what?
I think that for me, the point of the film was they were trying to get back together in a way that made sense. Like, I think James Spader went on this journey, and Deborah Kara Unger was kind of following him, and that was at the point where they finally were able to reconnect. I think
when he pushed the car over the ramp, type deal.
Well, I think that's a great way to put it, because the book is towards that calculated crash that kills Elizabeth Taylor. That's not in the movie. The movie ends with what's clearly a calculated crash where he runs his wife off the road. But, she's, and this is not like subtle in the movie, she's clearly part of it. She wants to be part of it. She sees him following her. She takes off her seatbelt, all that kind of stuff. And at the end, she's next to the car and he's cradling her. And she says she's okay.
Yeah.
And he says, well, maybe the next one.
Maybe next one.
And at least if you didn't die, we can have sex again next to a car. And that's the end of the movie. So it's I think the way you're supposed to read that is that their love has been renewed. And that's supposed to be perhaps not straightforwardly, but that's beautiful because they have reconnected through all these crazy experiences. When we first met them, they were not really as excited about each other without external people. Now they found something ridiculous and violent that they can use together. Of course, morally, they're endangering other people, so I don't care for that decision of theirs. But that last scene is pretty much, that's the peak of the love story. That's when the lovers come together. It's just not in something that I'd ever seen before.
Right. Now, when this came out, what was it, the year on this one? Do you know?
I think
96.
96.
It was trashed, right? I think they wouldn't even air it. They wouldn't play it in London, right? In Great Britain. It was
a moral panic, wasn't it?
Well, what happened was it came out at the Cannes Film Festival, and Francis Ford Coppola was the president of the jury. So it was one of the movies in the main competition for the Palme d'Or top prize. He hated it.
Oh.
He hated the movie so much.
Good to know.
Didn't want to consider it for anything. And the rest of the jury was like, this is a remarkable movie. We think it should win the main prize.
Wow.
He absolutely refused. So the jury, without his participation, got together and created a special grand jury prize and awarded it to Crash. And Coppola hated it so much, he wouldn't even be there to hand the award to David Cronenberg. He just despised the movie. Of course, at the same time, Martin Scorsese said it's one of the best movies of the 90s, one of the best movies I've ever seen. When it came out, there was a lot of shuffling around of should it be allowed to run in England. Ted Turner owned Fine Line Pictures, which was releasing it in the States, and he hated it, so it got all delayed. But when it came out, it did come out uncut in this country and in England, NC-17 and all, later maybe than it was planned. But the thing is, once you see the movie, it's everything that they said that it was, but it's also not that.
Oh, it's way tamer. That's what I mean. I was expecting.
And you've had 25 years to imagine what that
exactly.
movie might be.
Way tamer than I expected. And that's not because I can tolerate more. It's just way tamer than I expected. It's just, it had nothing.
I mean, how much is, our culture has changed, I would argue, a lot in the last 25 years when it comes to, like, sexuality.
Sexual mores? Okay.
And acceptance. Like, coming out in 1996, we were still in like, maybe a hangover with like the conservative Reagan era. Like, I think I still think this was pretty transgressive for like mid 90s.
I agree. I mean, look, a marriage where the relationship is open and they go and they have sexual experiences with other people and then they come back and they use that to fuel their own sexual relationship. Of course, that was happening in 1996.
Well, not to mention people
1976 and 1896. But open relationships and polyamory and all that stuff is way more part of just public discourse. So I think you're right. It's definitely the transgressive part of it is way less transgressive.
Well, I think it's more to do with car crashes and sex. Like, this guy's actually doing a movie where he's saying people get off on car crashes. And that's where you go, what the hell? That's warped. You can't do that. Car crashes are horrible. People can't think that they're, you're going to have an orgasm when you have a car crash. You can't do, and the whole, like you said in that other film, the way they shot the car and how lovely and all, I think it had more to do with car crashes being sexually exciting.
Let me tell you a story.
Uh-oh.
I've been in some car accidents. I've seen some car accidents. I was in a car at a left turn light that was red, so I wasn't driving. And at the intersection, this was a couple blocks from my house. Somebody ran a light and smashed into this car that was entering the intersection when it was supposed to. So I saw this accident, and it was a very serious accident. And one of the cars, the whole front came apart, and the other car that did not cause the accident was spun around in the middle of the intersection. And then everything just sort of stopped. And I got out, and I ran up to the car, and I had my cell phone, and people were calling 911, and there was a woman in the car. And she was definitely injured. It was very serious, but she was conscious. She was in shock. And I talked to her. I called her husband for her. I asked her what I could do for her while we waited for the ambulance to show up, all that kind of stuff. And then afterwards, I talked to the police, and they were super dismissive. Witnesses don't remember anything right. And so my experience in my life of a car accident was actually quite extremely emotional. None of it was sexual. But the idea that somebody could have some really intense experience related to the intense violence of a car crash, for these people was sexual. It's definitely not my experience. It's definitely more on the fringe of most people's experience. But the connection of those two and if you don't feel anything and you want to feel something really intense, that was very plausible to me.
Okay, I get it. I thought you were going to.
Ridiculous.
I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say
But you don't think that people try to treat their trauma through sexual relationships with other people?
Sure,
like
they might.
Physical trauma.
There's a paraphilia.
Physical and mental trauma. I mean, I would say a car crash.
I would say mental trauma, but physical trauma. Okay.
As well as physically.
I am not. This is way out of my pay grade here. This kind of. I thought you were going to say, Drew, you married that woman.
I would say that I'm not gonna say that you're gonna be immediately sexually excited as it's described in the book from a car crash. But I would say if someone experiences trauma of some sort, they may deal with it through sexual.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. And I think Cronenberg tends to take things that horrify us and just ramps it up and says, let's see how much you can take. And
James Spader and Holly Hunter are brought together by his guilt, which we can understand and relate to, and her grief, which we can understand and relate to. And he just takes it to another place. I mean, all of David Cronenberg's movies are about things that you can relate to. They're just extreme versions of things. They're about things. If they were just gross, there's a place for those movies, and we'll watch a bunch of those on this podcast. But he is a more sophisticated filmmaker than that, and so that's why Videodrome is super gross and also still really relevant.
Yeah, I've seen that one long time ago. That's early Deborah Harry too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Deborah Harry, whose mouth is a television. My goodness.
So, all right. Well, that was fun. I'm just going to say, I'm glad I saw it. I didn't like it. I found it, I was a little too detached. And I think that's the point. These people are all detached from life, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. But I felt detached from the film. I didn't care, especially at the end when her car goes over. It's like, yeah, they're trying to kill each other. I had no stake in any of them. And to me, Spader was just a little too. He's always creepy. I don't mean creepy. That's not the right word. But he's always off a little bit.
Weird.
Yeah,
he's weird.
And he was and having him be the lead, and you knew he was off anyway, because that whole having the collision with Holly Hunter was supposed to be a surprise. Not a surprise, but a shock, right? It was supposed to be an accident he had that changes his whole life, but he was already flaky. If she had an accident with any of the three of us, I don't think we would have ended up having the same reaction.
No. So yeah, he was already on a path towards that. But part of what I want to say, he mentions it in the movie. It's definitely in the book, and it's kind of mentioned in that short film as well, that you basically spend your whole life driving, and if you haven't had an accident, it's because you haven't had it yet. And all of the safety films and all the stuff and everything you see around you, you're going to have an accident. So for him, he was conscious of that and conscious of all the cars, and he finally had the accident, and that was his first release in the movie. Yeah. In the movie with a lot of releases in cars and car wrecks. But
I got a quick story before we wrap up.
Crazy thing.
Before we wrap up to the section called 2x4, which we'll get to, I have one little quick story. I used to do films for the Insurance Institute Highway Safety. The guys who did crash tests, right?
Yep.
They built this beautiful studio in Virginia, and they would do these slow. But then we got this batch of old German films of car crashes, and they used live German prisoners to do these car crashes. And it's the craziest thing you've ever seen. They're wearing seatbelts and everything, but they're live. Wow. And I imagine the deal they got is if you're a prisoner and you live, you're out, right? You get out of jail. If you don't live, you took a chance. The craziest thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
So yeah, these guys in Mercedes.
Not surprising.
Yeah. So it's Florida or Germany. Take your pick. But this was Germany. So, all right.
Germany's not.
That was great. So. Listen, I didn't love Crash. I'm glad I finally saw it. It wasn't as explicit and crazy as I thought it was going to be, but I still found it kind of boring. But you guys reading the books and all that, it's fun to listen to these takes. So. I enjoy it.
I think for me, this isn't Cronenberg's strongest movie. It's not my favorite one.
Yeah,
but I think everybody should see it once.
Yeah,
to see it, because it's not something you will see ever.
Oh, and you won't forget it either.
Yeah,
right.
This is the only film about this particular topic that.
And to see Holly Hunter, it's wild. It's wild. So yes, you should see it because it's fascinating. I guess it's just a little boring, a little detached.
I'm proud of you. You were very brave.
No, I'm not. Listen, this is fun. I'm enjoying these. Those little Ralph requests are going to be interesting because I think I'll surprise you guys with some of the things I want to see. Now it's time for 2 movies, 4 words, brought by Uncle Al and Drew. Here's one there, and here's the other. So we got Ceremony Angel, Wales Isolation. That sounds really... winning misogyny female director. Winning misogyny. I'm going with winning misogyny female director. Whose is that?
You have selected the movie that I'm bringing to the table.
Holy cow, Drew! I can't believe I picked one of yours.
So
what is it?
That movie is called The Boys Next Door. It's a movie from 1985. It stars, among other people, Charlie Sheen, hence The Winning. And it's directed by Penelope Spheris, who's done an awful lot of familiar movies. My wife turned me on to this movie. I had never seen it until, I think, this year or last year. It's basically a couple of teenagers from a small town going to the big city, and kind of like the people in Crash, they're a little bored of life, and they don't have anything to do, and it gets really intense.
What makes it a cult film? What makes this one? How would you? Why?
It's underseen.
Yeah.
It's got big names and big people in it, and it is got some, especially for the 80s. But even today, watching it today, there's some really quite disturbing and transgressive stuff in it. I could tell you this is what happens in this scene, and you'd go, "Wow, that sounds really awful." But I've seen that before. It's very intimate and it's very intense.
Okay.
And I think you'll be happy that you see it.
Excellent. Again, the name is?
The name is The Boys Next Door, which is innocuous. And it was written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong, who went on to be major writers on The X-Files and
Nice.
a bunch of other stuff. So there's some real talent on both sides of the camera
Right.
in this movie, and it's
Sounds-
worth seeing.
Sounds
I
good.
think this
Can't
was
wait.
recently released by Severn, the boutique.
Oh, did
level.
it get a new release?
Severn, yeah.
Right on.
Oh, I get it. So,
bought it on
okay.
Amazon.
I got one question before we end this. You have Drew. You have Crash, and I don't know if Al, if you have it, a Criterion collection of Crash. Is that where
I
you
believe
guys?
I have the Criterion release, and he has the 4K release, which is not in this country, but the 4K transfer, which was supervised by the director, by David Cronenberg. It's the same transfer, so he's got a 4K disc of the 4K transfer,
Yeah.
and I've got the 2K Blu-ray of the 4K transfer. So it's
And
the
they
best
think-
the movie has ever looked on home video.
And Criterion put it out, so that they thought it was something then.
Well,
Yeah.
everything except the transfer is
Right.
ported over from the 1997 or whenever it was Laserdisc release.
Oh wow.
So I mean, Criterion has wonderful supplements. The fact that there aren't new supplements doesn't bother me because I want the movie to look and sound as best as it can,
Sure.
especially if it's in line with what the filmmakers wanted. But yeah, it's an excellent release of a film that's right up Criterion's alley. So
That's great.
Well, the Arrow release, which I have here,
Mhm.
and I've showed many times. It has the 1971 Crash thing that you sent to us on YouTube.
right.
It had a Q&A with Cronenberg and Viggo Mortensen at the Toronto Film Festival. It also had a Q&A with Cronenberg and J.G. Ballard from 1996 on it, and it has
Oh, wow.
all this other stuff.
I think that one is actually from the Cannes Film Festival. So I haven't watched that, but that would be interesting too.
This one's from The Guardian.
Oh, from the Guardian. Okay, so a different one. Because I think
Yeah.
the Criterion has the Cannes press conference.
Okay.
Al, do you have this one on Laserdisc?
I do,
Oh,
and it's
interesting.
excellent.
Excellent. Would you trade that for one of mine?
Absolutely not.
Oh wow. Not even sorority babes at the bowling alley?
No.
Oh.
I could find some other ones to trade before
Okay.
I
Not
trade.
even for a T-shirt of the Deep.
Look at that.
Well, maybe.
All right, guys, this is a good one. I didn't enjoy the film, but I'm glad I watched it. Let me just put it that way. Can't wait to watch. What's again, The Boys
The
Next
Boys
Door?
Next Door from
Okay.
1985.
That'll be next week's show. All right.
Yep.
You guys have a great week, and stay safe.
Everybody drive safe.
Exactly. Drive safe.